Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Grumpy Snail Podcast. I am your host, Jonathan Snyder. Thank you for joining me as I try to squeeze 2 minutes of information into a 15-minute video. Make sure you click the like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Upload every Sunday at noon and sometimes randomly throughout the week. Make sure you check the merch store link in the description box down below. There's going to be a lot of information today with little segues, so make sure you pay attention. In October 2019, public health and policy experts from a number of institutions, including Johns Hopkins University, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and the World Economic Forum, met at the Pierre Hotel in New York City. The goal of this meeting was to conduct a simulation that presented attendees with a, quote, series of dramatic, scenario-based, facilitated discussions confronting difficult, true-to-life dilemmas associated with response to a hypothetical but scientifically plausible pandemic. The primary purpose was to develop recommended actions for government officials, internal organizations, and private businesses to take in order to achieve, quote, unprecedented levels of collaboration during the next pandemic, providing a partial foundation for what would become known as the Great Reset. This event would eerily be labeled as Event 201. On March 19, 2020, The Hill reported that during an important, quote, conference call featuring more than 200 members of the House Democratic Caucus, lawmakers laid out sweeping wish lists of provisions they wanted to see, including a bout in infrastructure spending, an expansion of Social Security benefits, funding for all mail voting systems. James Clyburn, House Majority Whip from South Carolina, said the call was a tremendous opportunity to restructure things to fit our vision. That vision included cash payments to individuals, low-cost loans for small businesses, new funding to boost the healthcare system, and a financial lifeline for the hardest-hit industries like aviation and cruise lines, as well as $300 million for refugees and migrants, $35 million in funding for the Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts, new fuel emission standards, and a climate change study. In July 2020, the Senate Republicans hosted a caucus meeting to discuss their strategy for negotiating another round of coronavirus relief. They, the congressional Republicans, said that Obama is for borrowing and spending. They're talking about spending another $1 trillion. There should be a law that they no longer allowed to talk about the debt, said Rand Paul, who later called the government's lack of fiscal restraint a, quote, abomination, and said there is no difference now between the two parties in spending. Congress passed the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, also known as the CARES Act, to help supplement the shuttered economy. By early June 2020, the federal government had sent 159 million payments, amounting to more than $267 million, plus an additional $2.5 billion to people living in U.S. territories in, quote, stimulus checks. In addition, government officials send unemployment workers $600 per week unemployment bonuses. The CARES Act also increased Medicaid funding. Many of the COVID-19 lockdowns and relief policies disproportionately benefited groups and businesses favored politically. Carol Roth, who is an entrepreneur and former investment banker, wrote about this in her book, How the Government Used the Pandemic to Crush the Backbone of America. She writes, quote, government entities, the same ones that were supposed to protect personal property rights and all individual rights, told many businesses, primarily small businesses, that they were considered non-essential and that they had to shut down. That was it. Millions of businesses across the country received directives to close, but nothing else. No compensation for helping the government or society. No special provisions to safeguard their own, their staff's livelihoods. Just pack it in, shut it down, and go home. Additionally, she writes, with all of those giveaways, you might expect that small businesses would have also been taken care of by the government. The amount of money required to ensure that small businesses stay open appropriately, compensate them under an eminent domain scenario, and preserve jobs was probably in the $1 trillion range. Instead, what small businesses received as part of the CARES Act amounted to less than 20% of the overall relief package. Again, a figure that makes little less given that small business account for half around seeds. So you totally don't understand what I'm saying. Instead, what small businesses received as part of the CARES Act amounted to less than 20% of the overall relief package. Again, a figure that makes little sense given that small businesses account for around half of the economy and are the most vulnerable and most directly affected by the government Black Swan. That was the Black Swan event that was a pandemic. Instead of giving money to small business owners quickly and directly, which would have been the most effective tactic and consistent with the direct payments received by the like of Congress members' cronies, such as the Kennedy Center and universities, Congress cobbled together a shoddy, confusing, forgivable loan program in the PPP. I recommend reading her books. As a part of this Great Reset series, I will be covering her new book, You Will Own Nothing. The reason corporations were preserved and small businesses destroyed is because in the grand new stakeholder economy dreamed up by the Davos elites and Biden's White House, corporations could be controlled. This is not an argument that coronavirus was released on the public like some wild conspiracy theorists claim, but undermining small businesses during the pandemic was a benefit. Rahm Emanuel, the former chief of staff for President Obama, gave a speech at a conference on November 19th, 2008, hosted by the Wall Street Journal. In his speech, he was speaking directly to the financial crisis at the time, but would later also pertain to the pandemic as well. His speech went as follows, quote, "You never want a serious crisis to go to waste. And what I mean by that is an opportunity to do things that you think you could not do before. I think America as a whole in 1973 and 74, and not just my view, but obviously the administrations, missed the opportunity to deal with the energy crisis that was before us. For a long time, our energy policy came down to cheap oil. This is an opportunity. What used to be long-term problems, be they in the healthcare area, energy area, education area, fiscal area, tax area, regulatory reform area, things that have to postpone for long-term that were long-term are now immediate and must be dealt with. This crisis provides the opportunity for us, as I would say, the opportunity to do things that you could not do before. The good news, I suppose, if you want to see a silver lining, is the problems are big enough that they lend themselves to both ideas from both parties for the solution. Little crises happen all the time. So it's hard to affect change. A big or a serious crisis, such as a pandemic, war, or climate change, allows for big changes or altercations. As Rahm in his speech mentions, in his speech about the silver lining, the pandemic showed both parties are eager to expand government. It seems that just about everyone in Washington is now looking for ways to use, quote, a serious crisis to expand their power and make American families increasingly dependent on government. A quote from Prince Charles, now King Charles, supports this. He said during the pandemic, quote, "We have a golden opportunity to see something good from this crisis. Its unprecedented shockwaves may well make people more receptive to a big change. Big change. As we move from rescue to recovery, we have the unique but rapidly shrinking window of opportunity to learn lessons and reset ourselves on a more sustainable path." As the coronavirus began to break out in early 2020, President Donald Trump's policies were considered xenophobic. Politico warned, coronavirus quarantine, travel ban could backfire, experts fear. The New York Times published an article titled, quote, "Who says it's not safe to travel to China?" The article continued, "Although travel restrictions may intuitively seem like the right thing to do, this is not something that the WHO, the World Health Organization, usually recommends. This is because of the social disruption they cause and the intensive use of resources required." By March, everything had switched. Churches that refused to stop worshiping in person were warned that they could be permanently shut down if they disobeyed. Mayor de Blasio's decree in New York, New York, Oregon Governor Kate Brown issued a stay stay-at-home order that closed most businesses in the state and threatened to punish violators with a $1,250 fine or up to 30 days in jail. Washington Governor Jay Inslee, I believe was his name, also closed most businesses in his state, and he banned nearly all social and recreational gatherings, including funerals and weddings. California state and county officials closed most of the state economy, mandated stay-at-home orders, and released more than 3,500 state prison inmates, and reduced the bail to $0 for those charged with misdemeanors, and also some lower-level felonies, all in an attempt to slow the spread of the virus. Governor Gretchen Whitmer, her executive order not only shut down Michigan economic activity and outlawed religious gatherings, violating the First Amendment of the Constitution, but also imposed $1,000 fines on violators and promised to put those who refuse to comply with the order in jail for as many as 3 months. Former Rhode Island governor and Biden's current Commerce Secretary called in the state's National Guard to conduct door-to-door searches, looking for New Yorkers who crossed Rhode Island's southern border without a government permission slip. By April, more than 40 states, most of which were led by Republicans, had enacted partial or total shutdowns, and some critics who had previously attacked Trump for his racist and unnecessary travel ban criticized him for seeming too eager to move the country back toward reopening. Prior to lockdowns, the U.S. economy had started to boom. Unemployment for African Americans, Asians, Hispanics, and women were at near all-time lows. After a few months of COVID-19, the economy collapsed. Black unemployment went from 5.6% to 16.7% in a few months. Not since the Great Depression has an economic collapse of this magnitude occurred. Unlike the Great Depression, though, the coronavirus crash was created by the government, with widespread support from large corporations. The obvious initial motivation behind the discussion to close the U.S. economy was, of course, fear. However, within the first 30 days, it became clear the models were off, in some cases by more than 1 million deaths, and the death rates for those infected were significantly lower than originally estimated. Yet lockdowns continued. The U.S. added more than $3 trillion to the national debt from 2016 to 2019, and it was on pace to run a $1 trillion deficit in 2020. In just the first 6 months of 2020, the national debt, spurred most by the coronavirus lockdowns and related government spending programs, increased by $3 trillion. Analysts predict that the increased spending and the debt caused by the federal government's relief legislation could add a total of $6 trillion to the national debt by 2030. To put that in perspective, during the 100-year period from 1900 to 2000, the national debt increased by $5.62 trillion. And that's after 2 world wars, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, a decades-long Cold War with Russia, countless foreign operations in countries around the world, FDR's massive expansion of government under the Green New Deal, and Lyndon Johnson's even more expansive war on poverty and the Great Society reforms. The whole concept of Monty Printer Go Burr is based on a concept called modern monetary theory, or Kara Rolf's more funny version, magic money theory. That I'll discuss in a later video. There are 2 other reasons the pandemic has been so important for the Great Reset movement. First, it has given the state and federal government officials more confidence that they can enact a radical tyranny and arbitrary mandates. Not only did many Americans go along with whatever their masters tell them, but also they worked with government to help silence anyone who stands up against these actions. And second, it is virtually impossible to convince people that the global economy needs to be torn down and replaced with a new system when unemployment is at historical lows, retirement account values are soaring, and the economy seems poised to continue growing. After the government lockdowns, though, everything had changed. Again, not a conspiracy theory. The World Economic Forum stated on their website, quote, "The COVID-19 crisis and the political, economic, and social disruptions it caused is fundamentally changing the traditional context for decision-making. The inconsistencies, inadequacies, and contradictions of multiple systems from health and financial to energy and education are more exposed than ever amidst the global context of concern for lives, livelihoods, and the planet. Leaders find themselves at a historic crossroads, managing short-term pressures against medium and long-term uncertainties." The article continues, quote, "As we enter a unique window of opportunity to shape the recovery, this initiative, the Great Reset, will offer insights to help inform all those determining the future state of global relations, the directions of national economies, the priorities of societies, the nature of business models, and the management of global commons. I want to wrap things up. I'm pushing close on time. I want to wrap things up right now with a few final comments and quotes. The whole point of these dense videos is to inform you on what the Great Reset is, along with proof that it's a real thing, by showing things that have happened and the people's responses to it. Klaus Schwab stated, quote, COVID-19 has accelerated our transition into the age of the fourth industrial revolution. We have to make that the new technologies in the digital, biological, and physical world remain human-centered and serve society as a whole, providing everyone with fair access. This global pandemic has also demonstrated again how interconnected we are. We have to restore a functioning system of a smart global cooperation structured to address the challenges of the next 50 years. The Great Reset will require us to integrate all stakeholders of global society into a community of common interest, purpose, and action. Shannon Burrow, that's an end quote. Shannon Burrow, who is the General Secretary of the International Trade Union Confederation and a fellow World Economic Forum member, said, quote, I can see how we could use this opportunity to design a better world, but we need both national and multilateral institutions to make it work. Another World Economic Forum member and managing director of the International Monetary Fund, Kristina Georgieva. Oh man, these names are fun. Said, quote, we know this pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic, if left to its own devices, will deepen inequality. But if we were to concentrate in investing in people, in the social fabric of our societies, in access to opportunities and education for all, and expansion of social programs, then we can have a world that is a better world for all. The best memorial to those who lost their lives to the pandemic is a greener, smarter, fairer world. And lastly today, the global chairman of PricewaterhouseCoopers, one of the most powerful accounting firms, Robert Morris, said this, quote, in early June, Klaus Schwab called for a great reset following the pandemic, pressing the case for rapid collective action. Schwab said the response to COVID-19 proved that a reset of our economic and social foundations is possible. He added, now is our best time to achieve it. I agree. It is becoming increasingly clear that the global economy is no longer delivering what is needed. The most obvious symptoms of this breakdown include climate change, inequality, and populism. Social progress has become decoupled from economic progress. Put simply, if we have a design problem, now COVID-19 is making flaws even more apparent. Hopefully, I didn't lose you in the weeds. There's so much information to cover in this short time, but your 15 minutes is up. But the Grumpy Ramblings will continue, so make sure you tune in next time. Make sure you like, share, subscribe to my channel. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining me. Good night, cheers, and Godspeed.